Hey there, welcome to Fluent English Journey. Imagine telling your stories in English, naturally and confidently, without stopping to think. That's what we practice here, step by step, story by story. Hit subscribe and let's make your English come alive. It all started on a quiet evening, the kind of evening when the sky turns soft orange and the world feels peaceful. I was sitting in my small living room, a cup of tea warming my hands, scrolling through my phone like I do every day. Then, a question appeared in my mind, sudden and strange. Why am I trying so hard to fix myself? At first, it felt silly. I mean, isn't trying to improve yourself normal? But somehow, the thought stayed, like a small stone thrown into a still lake, making ripples I couldn't ignore. I put down my phone, sipped my tea slowly, and let the question echo. Fix myself? What does that even mean? Did I really need fixing, or had I been living under the heavy shadow of my own expectations? I remember the exact feeling, my chest tight, my mind racing, and yet a strange calmness inside, like the world paused just for a second. This was not just about learning English or becoming better at work or school. No, it was about me, about the way I looked at myself every morning in the mirror. And maybe, just maybe, it had something to do with how I spoke English too. You see, I had been learning English for years. I practiced, I studied, I repeated words and phrases again and again, hoping to sound perfect, hoping to avoid mistakes, hoping to be someone I admired. And yet, every time I spoke, even when people complimented me, a little voice inside whispered, "You are not enough." That voice was sneaky. It didn't scream. It whispered softly, like a shadow following me around. And that evening, I realized something shocking. I had spent so much energy trying to fix that voice, trying to erase it, that I had forgotten to listen to my real self. I decided to experiment. I asked myself, slowly and clearly, a question that felt strange and almost rebellious. What if I stopped trying to fix myself? My mind jumped immediately. Stop learning? Stop improving? Stop becoming better? But then I held that thought. What if improvement did not come from fixing what is wrong? What if it came from understanding and accepting what already is? I took a deep breath and started to think about my English journey in a completely new way. I remembered my first English class. I was 10 years old, sitting on a tiny chair, listening to a teacher I barely understood. My notebook was full of mistakes. Every day I tried to copy the words perfectly, erase my errors, and show the teacher that I was good enough. But I was never satisfied. Every little mistake felt huge, like a mark on my soul. I realized that this feeling had followed me for years, not just in English, but in life. And, suddenly, I saw a connection. My fear of mistakes in English was not about grammar or vocabulary, it was about me. My fear of not being enough. That night, I made a quiet decision. I would try something radical. I would stop chasing perfection. I would stop trying to fix the way I speak, the way I look, the way I live. Instead, I would focus on listening, on noticing, on understanding. I would treat English as a friend, not a test. I would treat myself as a friend too. And so, my journey began, not a journey to fix myself, but a journey to explore myself. I wanted to see what happens when I speak English freely, when I let mistakes happen, when I stop judging every word that comes out of my mouth. And more importantly, I wanted to see what happens when I stop trying to fix my inner voice. The next morning, I woke up with a strange excitement. I felt lighter, almost playful. I opened my notebook and wrote the first sentence that came to my mind in English, without thinking about grammar. I am sitting in my room. I see the sun. I feel good. It was simple, awkward, and beautiful. I smiled at the words. For the first time, I didn't correct them. I just read them slowly, letting them sink in. Then I asked myself a question that would guide my entire journey. What if English is not a test, but a mirror? A mirror that shows who I really am. The thought was powerful. Suddenly, every mistake, every hesitation, every stumble in speech was not failure. It was a reflection. A reflection of my curiosity, my courage, my human self. And something inside me shifted. By the end of that day, I realized something simple, yet life-changing. Maybe trying to fix yourself is the hardest trap of all. It feels productive, it feels necessary, but in reality, it hides who you are. And if I could learn to accept myself as I am, even while learning English, then maybe I could finally speak freely, listen deeply, and live fully. That evening, I walked outside and looked at the sky. It was soft and orange again, just like the night before. I felt a small, quiet joy. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I would ever stop feeling that little voice of doubt. But I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer trying to fix myself. I was learning to live and to speak and to listen exactly as I am. And that, I realized, is the beginning of real freedom. The next morning, I woke up with the same quiet excitement, but also with a little nervousness. Change is always strange at first, and I could feel it buzzing in my chest. I made my usual cup of tea and sat by the window, looking at the city slowly waking up. People were walking, cars were moving, birds were flying, life going on, full of sounds and colors, and I realized I hadn't felt this awake in a long time. The question came back to me, what if I stopped trying to fix myself? But this time, it felt like a challenge. Not a scary challenge, but one that made my heart beat faster, the kind that makes you feel alive. I opened my notebook, the one I always used for English practice, and stared at the first blank page. Normally, I would feel a little panic. What if I make mistakes? What if my sentences are wrong? But today, I tried something different. I whispered to myself, softly, it's okay. Just right. And I began. I see a cat outside. The cat is black. It is walking slowly. I like cats. I am happy to see it. I read it aloud. My words were simple, maybe even childish. But they sounded real. They sounded like me. And for the first time in years, I didn't correct a single word. I didn't worry about grammar. I didn't try to make it perfect. I just let it be. Then I noticed something strange. The more I allowed mistakes, the more I wanted to speak. I wanted to write. I wanted to explore English in its natural form, without judgment. Mistakes were no longer enemies, they were teachers. Every wrong word, every hesitation, every awkward sentence was showing me something I didn't know before. It was like looking into a mirror, not to see flaws, but to see truth. Later that morning, I decided to do something brave. I called a friend, someone I could practice English with. Normally, I would have prepared for hours, rehearsed sentences in my head, tried to sound perfect. But today, I took a deep breath and said, hello. Can we talk in English? My voice shook slightly, and my heart raced. My friend sounded happy and a little surprised. We started slowly, talking about simple things, the weather, breakfast, a movie we watched last week. And here's the magic. Mistakes happened. Words came out wrong. I mispronounced names. I forgot small words. But instead of panicking, I laughed. My friend laughed too. And the conversation became easier, warmer, more real. I realized that perfection had never made me happy. Connection made me happy. Listening and being heard made me happy. English, in that moment, was not a test. It was a bridge. After the call, I sat back and reflected. I noticed a pattern. My fear of mistakes had controlled me for years, but only because I thought mistakes were the enemy. What if they weren't? What if mistakes were a mirror, showing exactly where I was and what I could discover next? I smiled, slowly, and wrote in my notebook, mistakes are my friends. They teach me. They show me. The next day, I took it a step further. I decided to explore English beyond books, beyond classes, beyond teachers and rules. I went to a small park nearby with my notebook and a pen. Children were playing, dogs were running, old people were sitting on benches. I started speaking to myself, describing what I saw. The boy is running. The dog is barking. The sun is bright. I feel happy. I felt a little silly at first, talking to myself in English. But then I noticed something amazing. Talking to myself, without judgment, made the words flow naturally. My mind felt clear. I wasn't thinking about mistakes. I was thinking about life. About colors. About sounds. About joy. And then, something even more surprising happened. I overheard a small conversation in English nearby. Two tourists were talking, struggling with words, hesitating, smiling. And I realized I understood them. I didn't need perfect grammar. I didn't need flawless pronunciation. I just needed to listen. I just needed to care. And suddenly, English didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a door opening to the world. By the evening, I sat in my room again, reflecting on the day. I noticed that my inner voice, the one that used to whisper, "You're not enough," was quieter. It wasn't gone, but it was softer. I wrote in my notebook, "I am learning. I am allowed to make mistakes. I am enough." The words felt heavy with truth, yet light with freedom. I smiled and sipped my tea slowly, savoring the warmth. Then came another question, gentle but powerful. What if life itself is not about fixing, but about noticing? It sounded strange, almost philosophical. But I felt it deeply. I realized that every mistake in English, every hesitation in speech, every awkward moment in life was not a failure. It was an opportunity to notice something new, to see, to feel, to learn, to grow. That night, I tried something new. I recorded my voice on my phone, speaking freely about my day. No script. No rules. Just words coming out naturally. I stumbled, I laughed, I paused, I repeated. And when I played it back, I felt amazed. The voice on the recording was me. Real, imperfect, alive. Not fixed. Not perfect. Just me. I realized then that I had been holding my breath for years, trying to control everything. My words, my mistakes, my self-image. And in that holding, I had forgotten the joy of speaking, of listening, of being present. That evening, I wrote in my notebook a sentence I would remember forever. Freedom comes when I stop fixing myself and start noticing myself. Before sleep, I reflected on the day's discoveries. I realized that English was teaching me more than words. It was teaching me courage. It was teaching me patience. It was teaching me to love the sound of my own voice, even when it stumbled. And most importantly, it was teaching me to stop seeing mistakes as enemies and start seeing them as mirrors. I drifted off to sleep with a sense of peace, knowing tomorrow would bring more challenges, more words, more mistakes, and I was ready to meet them all, with curiosity and kindness. The morning light was soft, almost golden, as if the world itself was giving me permission to begin again. I stretched, opened my notebook, and felt a strange sense of excitement. I realized that the days of hiding behind books, behind rules, behind correct English, were slowly disappearing. I felt a new kind of courage growing inside me, the courage to speak, even if I stumbled, even if I made mistakes, even if my voice shook. I decided to test this courage in a small way. I went to a local cafe I had never been to before. It was cozy, with the smell of coffee floating in the air, soft music playing in the background, and people typing quietly on their laptops. I found a corner table, opened my notebook, and started writing. But then I noticed something. Everyone around me was speaking English, laughing, sharing stories. And suddenly, I wanted to join in. I took a deep breath, closed my notebook, and walked to the counter. The barista smiled at me. "Hello. How can I help you?" she asked. My heart jumped. Normally, I would have rehearsed the sentence in my head 10 times, worried about pronunciation, worried about grammar. But today, I simply smiled and said, slowly, "Hi, can I have a coffee, please?" The barista smiled warmly and repeated, "Sure, what kind of coffee would you like?" I paused. I could feel the old voice in my head whispering, "Say it perfectly. Don't make a mistake." But I remembered what I had learned. Mistakes were not enemies, they were mirrors. I took a deep breath and said, "Small coffee, black, please." She smiled, nodded, and said, "Great. That will be $2.50. I paid, thanked her, and walked to a table. And something remarkable happened. I felt a wave of joy, small but powerful. It was the joy of speaking, not perfectly, not flawlessly, but truly. I had spoken English in the real world. I had connected. And it felt alive. As I sipped my coffee, I watched people around me. There was a young woman laughing with her friend, a man reading a book quietly, a group of students talking about a project. I realized that everyone around me was practicing life in their own way, making mistakes, learning, laughing, stumbling, trying. And I understood. Courage is not about never failing. Courage is about stepping into life, even when failure is possible. I decided to take the courage one step further. I approached a small table where a man was reading a newspaper. I smiled and asked softly, "Excuse me, can I sit here?" He looked up, slightly surprised, but then nodded. "Sure, go ahead," he said. My heart was racing, but I took a seat. We started talking. At first, the conversation was slow, hesitant. I stumbled over words. He corrected me gently, but I didn't mind. I asked him questions about the city, about his favorite places, about books he liked to read. And I noticed something incredible. The more I spoke, the more confident I felt. The more mistakes I made, the more I learned. English was no longer a test. English was life. Later, he asked me a question that made me pause. "Why do you speak English like this? You don't worry about mistakes." "Most people do." I smiled, thinking carefully. I said, "I am learning, and I stopped trying to fix myself. I just want to speak, and listen, and connect." He nodded slowly, as if he understood something deep. "That's very brave," he said. And in that moment, I felt it. Bravery is not loud. It is quiet, gentle, and persistent. It is the courage to speak, even when you fear failure. I walked home that evening feeling lighter. I noticed that my thoughts were calmer. The little voice that used to whisper, "You're not enough," was still there, but it was softer. Almost like a friend reminding me, "Be careful, yes, but you can do this." That night, I tried a new exercise. I recorded myself speaking freely about the cafe, the people, the conversations I had. I didn't worry about grammar. I didn't worry about pronunciation. I just spoke, letting my voice flow naturally. When I listened to the recording, I smiled. It was imperfect, awkward, sometimes hesitant, but it was alive. It was me. The next morning, I reflected further. I realized that courage in speaking English, or in anything, was not about perfection. It was about presence. Being present with words, with people, with life. The more present I became, the less fear I felt. The more I spoke, the more I learned. The more I listened, the more I connected. That day, I practiced speaking with myself again, describing simple things in my room. The sun is bright. I see my notebook. I feel happy. I want to learn. I want to speak. Slowly, I noticed the rhythm of English, the flow of words, the music hidden in sentences. I realized that speaking was not just a skill, it was a way to experience life. Then I decided to take the courage even further. I joined an online English conversation group. People from all over the world were there. Some were beginners, some were advanced. We introduced ourselves. I stumbled. I mispronounced words. I hesitated. But I laughed and I kept going. And something magical happened. Others started listening. Others started encouraging. The mistakes that once terrified me now created connection. The imperfections became bridges. By the end of the session, I realized something simple but profound. Courage is a practice, not a one-time action. Speaking English, making mistakes, connecting with others, it was all part of the practice. And the practice itself was teaching me more than any grammar book ever could. That evening, I wrote in my notebook, "Courage is speaking. Courage is listening. Courage is being here fully." And I smiled because I finally understood. The journey was not about fixing my English. It was about discovering my own voice. The voice that had been hidden under fear and judgment for so long. The voice that was real, imperfect, human. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about the simple truth I had discovered. Mistakes are mirrors, courage is speaking, and life is waiting. And suddenly, I felt ready, not ready to be perfect, not ready to be flawless, but ready to be myself. Ready to speak. Ready to listen. Ready to live. The next morning, I woke up with a quiet sense of curiosity. Speaking courageously had brought me joy, but now I realized there was another part of the journey I had been ignoring: listening. Not just listening to English words, not just understanding sentences, but listening deeply, listening to people, to life, and most importantly, to myself. I poured my tea slowly and sat by the window. Outside, the city was alive with small sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant honking of cars, children laughing. Normally, I would have let these sounds fade into the background. But today, I listened. I noticed each sound. I tried to describe them in English. The wind moves the leaves. The cars are loud. The children are laughing. I feel calm. As I spoke, I realized something amazing. When I listened deeply and then spoke about it, English became easier. Words came naturally, not forced. Sentences flowed, not like rules in a book, but like rivers in motion. I understood that listening was not just hearing, it was attention, curiosity, and presence. Later that morning, I decided to practice listening in a more interactive way. I called a friend I had been practicing English with. Normally, our conversations were simple. "How are you?" "I am fine." But today, I wanted to listen deeply. I started with a question. "What did you notice today that made you happy?" There was a pause on the other side. I could hear my friend thinking, choosing words carefully. Then he said slowly, "I noticed the sun shining on my balcony. It made me feel peaceful. And my dog barked at a bird. It was funny." I smiled. I asked gently, "Why did it make you feel peaceful?" He explained, and I listened, really listened, without thinking about what I would say next. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct him. I just heard him. And I noticed something magical. The conversation felt deeper, warmer, more real. We were connecting, not just speaking. After the call, I reflected in my notebook. I wrote, "Listening is not just understanding words. Listening is feeling words. Listening is connecting with people and life." The words felt heavy with truth. I realized that all my years of studying English had taught me how to speak correctly, but not how to listen fully. And listening fully was the key to understanding, to connection, to flow. That afternoon, I went for a walk in the park. I decided to practice listening in a new way. I sat on a bench and simply observed. I listened to the conversations around me, without joining. I noticed the rhythm of English in real life, the laughter, the pauses, the hurried words, the soft tones. I tried to repeat quietly to myself what I heard. The boy is playing soccer. The girl is singing a song. The man is reading a newspaper. The wind is moving the trees. I realized that listening this way was not just about English. It was about noticing life. Every sound, every sentence, every word carried meaning. And when I listened deeply, my own words became richer, more natural, more expressive. English was no longer separate from life. It was life itself. That evening, I tried a new experiment. I put on my headphones and listened to an English podcast. But instead of just hearing, I listened actively. I paused, repeated phrases out loud, asked myself questions. What does this mean? How would I say it in my own words? I noticed small details, the tone of voice, the pauses, the emphasis on certain words. And slowly, I realized that listening actively was like opening a door. Each sentence became a window into culture, emotion, and human connection. Later, I called my online conversation group. I decided to focus entirely on listening today. I asked questions and waited. I repeated what people said in my own words. I noticed intonation, emotion, small details in vocabulary. And I felt a shift. My fear of mistakes, my old desire to fix myself, faded again. Listening deeply gave me confidence. Listening fully gave me presence. That night, I reflected in my notebook. When I listen, I learn. When I listen, I connect. When I listen, I feel alive. The words felt simple, but they carried weight. I realized that all my practice, all my courage to speak, all my struggle with mistakes led me here, to listening deeply. I thought about how listening deeply could change life itself. Not just English, not just speaking, but relationships, understanding, empathy. When I listened to others without judgment, without thinking about correcting them, without comparing myself, I noticed something beautiful. People felt heard. And when people felt heard, connection happened. English became not a skill, but a tool for human connection. That night, before sleep, I practiced one final exercise. I closed my eyes, listened to the sounds in my room, the ticking clock, the hum of electricity, the soft wind outside, and described them in English. The clock is ticking slowly. I hear the wind. I feel calm. I am here. I am alive. I realized then that the journey of English was not about words, grammar, or tests. It was about presence, courage, and attention. Speaking courageously had taught me to act. Listening deeply taught me to be. And together, they created a rhythm of life, of language, of connection. I smiled, closed my notebook, and whispered softly, I don't need to fix myself. I just need to listen, speak, and notice. That is enough. The morning light came softly through my window, painting the room with gold and shadows. I stretched and felt a small excitement. Speaking courageously and listening deeply had already changed me in ways I couldn't fully describe. But there was still a quiet fear lingering inside, fear of being imperfect. I realized that even though I had stopped trying to fix myself completely, a small part of me still wanted to be perfect. I made my tea and sat by the window. I stared at the notebook in front of me, the one full of words, mistakes, reflections, and discoveries. I whispered to myself, what if I embrace imperfection? What if I enjoy mistakes instead of fearing them? The idea felt strange at first. Enjoy mistakes? Could I really do that? I decided to try a small experiment. I opened my notebook and wrote the first sentence that came to mind in English. I eat a breakfast. I drink tea. The cat is running fast. I am happy today. I read it aloud slowly. I noticed small mistakes. I eat a breakfast. Should it be, I have breakfast? Normally, my mind would panic. Normally, I would erase the sentence and start again. But today, I smiled. I said softly, it's okay. This is part of learning. This is fun. I repeated the sentences, laughing at the small mistakes. I felt light, almost playful. I realized something powerful. Mistakes could be joyful. Each mistake was a little puzzle, a small adventure, a way to notice life and language. Later that morning, I decided to test my idea in real life. I went to the local market. The air was filled with smells of fresh vegetables, spices, and bread. I walked slowly, observing, speaking softly to myself in English. The tomatoes are red. The bread smells good. The man is smiling. Then I decided to ask for something in English. I approached a small stall and said slowly, "Excuse me. I want 2 apples, please." The vendor looked at me, smiled, and said, "Sure, 2 apples, that is $1.50. I handed him the money and smiled. But then I realized I had said "I want" in a way that sounded a little rude in English. Normally, I would have felt embarrassed, panicked, or tried to correct myself. But today I laughed. I said softly, "It's okay. It's English. It is fine." The vendor smiled again. The mistake didn't ruin the moment. In fact, it made it real. As I walked home, I reflected on the day. Imperfection was not a problem. Imperfection was a teacher. Imperfection made life human. And the more I embraced it, the freer I felt. I noticed a small shift inside myself. The old voice whispering, "You are not enough," was softer than ever. It had almost disappeared. That afternoon, I tried a new exercise. I recorded myself speaking freely about my day. I didn't prepare. I didn't think about grammar. I let the words flow naturally. I walk in the market. I see many people. I buy apples. I feel happy. I laugh at myself. When I listened to the recording, I noticed every small mistake, every awkward sentence, but instead of judging, I smiled. I said softly, "This is me. Real, alive, learning." The joy of imperfection filled the room. I felt warm, light, and playful. English had become more than a skill. It had become a game, a story, a living experience. That evening, I joined my online conversation group again. I decided to focus entirely on imperfection. I spoke freely, laughed at mistakes, repeated words wrong on purpose, and noticed how people responded. The group was curious, engaged, and kind. They laughed, encouraged, corrected gently, and shared their own mistakes. I realized then that imperfection was contagious in the best way. It created connection. It created trust. It created joy. Later, I reflected quietly in my notebook. I am allowed to make mistakes. I am allowed to be imperfect. I am allowed to enjoy English, life, and myself. The words felt simple, but they carried deep truth. I realized that all my years of trying to be perfect, to fix every mistake, had blocked my joy. But now joy was back. And it was sweeter than I could have imagined. That night, I practiced one final exercise. I closed my eyes, spoke freely in English about anything in my room. The lamp is on. The notebook is open. The cat is sleeping. I feel happy. I make mistakes. I laugh. I speak. I listen. I notice the rhythm of the words. I notice the flow of my voice. I notice the joy in imperfection. And I realized a small, profound truth. Learning English and life was not about perfection. It was about presence, courage, listening, and joy. Mistakes were not enemies. They were friends, guides, teachers, and mirrors. As I lay in bed that night, I whispered softly to myself, "I am enough. I am learning. I am speaking. I am listening. I am imperfect, and that is beautiful." And in that moment, I felt a small, quiet freedom, like a bird stretching its wings for the first time. The journey was far from over, but I knew one thing clearly. Imperfection was not a problem. It was a gift. The morning sun spilled into my room in golden streams, making the world feel soft and alive. I had been practicing courage, listening deeply, and embracing imperfection for several days now. Each day brought a small shift inside me, like a quiet stream slowly carving a path through the land. And that morning, I realized there was a new challenge waiting, finding flow in English. Not just speaking, not just listening, not just making mistakes, but speaking and listening naturally, like a river that moves effortlessly, smooth and alive. I poured my tea and opened my notebook. I stared at the blank page. Normally, a blank page could feel intimidating. But today, I whispered softly, "Flow is not about perfection. Flow is about movement. Let it come." I picked up my pen and wrote, "The sun is bright. I see the birds flying. I hear children laughing. I feel alive. I walk slowly. I smile." I read it aloud, slowly. The words felt simple, yet they had rhythm. They had life. And I noticed something new. I wasn't stopping to correct myself. I wasn't thinking about grammar. I wasn't worrying about mistakes. The words were flowing naturally, like water over stones. Later, I decided to take this idea into real life. I went to the park with my notebook and phone. I wanted to practice speaking, listening, and noticing all at once. I sat on a bench, observed my surroundings, and began to speak softly in English, describing everything I saw. A boy is kicking a ball. A girl is singing a song. A dog is running fast. The wind moves the leaves. I am sitting here. I feel happy. Then I tried something daring. I recorded myself speaking freely for 5 minutes, describing everything in the park. I didn't stop. I didn't correct. I didn't plan. I just let the words flow. And when I played it back, I noticed the beauty in imperfection, the rhythm in mistakes, the melody in simple words. The flow wasn't about perfect grammar, it was about connection, presence, and life. Later in the afternoon, I called my online conversation group. Today, I wanted to focus on flow. I started speaking, describing my morning, the park, the people, the sounds. At first, I stumbled. Words came out wrong. I hesitated. But I remembered what I had learned. Mistakes were mirrors, courage was speaking, listening was deep, and imperfection was joyful. Slowly, the conversation began to flow. Words came easier. Sentences connected. Questions and answers moved naturally, like a dance. I noticed how the flow was not about being perfect, it was about presence. About listening. About responding. About noticing the rhythm of language and life. After the conversation, I reflected in my notebook, flow is not speed. Flow is not perfection. Flow is presence, attention, and connection. Flow is feeling the words, letting them move naturally. The words felt heavy with truth. I realized that flow was the missing piece in my English journey. All my study, practice, courage, listening, and embracing imperfection had led me here, to this natural, alive movement of words and life. That evening, I decided to combine everything I had learned so far. I sat in my room, opened my notebook, and began a full exercise. I described my day, spoke freely, listened to my own voice, and repeated words naturally. I made mistakes. I laughed. I paused. I smiled. I noticed my feelings, my surroundings, my thoughts. I realized that flow was not a goal. Flow was a state of being. When I stopped trying to fix myself, when I embraced mistakes, when I listened deeply, and when I spoke courageously, flow emerged naturally. It was there all along, I just had to allow it. Later that night, I reflected quietly before sleep. I wrote in my notebook, I am learning English. I am speaking freely. I am listening deeply. I am embracing mistakes. I am flowing with life. I am enough. I smiled as I read it aloud. The words sounded simple, but they carried power. They reminded me that the journey was not about rushing to improve. It was not about perfection, comparison, or judgment. The journey was about presence, courage, listening, imperfection, and flow. All of these together created life, and English became the path to notice it. Finally, before bed, I practiced one last exercise. I closed my eyes and described everything I felt. I feel calm. I feel alive. I feel joy. I am learning. I am speaking. I am listening. I am imperfect. I am flowing. And as I whispered these words, I felt a deep peace inside. The old voice that said, "You are not enough," had almost vanished. In its place was curiosity, acceptance, and joy. I realized then, fully, that the journey of English and life was not about fixing, rushing, or fearing mistakes. It was about presence, flow, and connection. I closed my notebook, turned off the light, and whispered softly, "I am enough. I am learning. I am speaking. I am listening. I am flowing. I am alive." And in that moment, I felt a quiet, profound freedom. The morning light spilled gently into my room, soft and warm. I woke with a quiet curiosity buzzing inside me. Over the past days, I had practiced courage, listening deeply, embracing imperfection, and finding flow. Each day had built something subtle, a small shift in the way I spoke, the way I listened, and the way I felt. But that morning, I realized there was one final piece waiting, realizing my voice. Not the perfect voice, not the corrected voice, not the voice that others wanted me to have, but my own real, human, alive voice. I made my tea and sat by the window, notebook in hand. I stared at the blank page. I whispered softly to myself, "Today, I will speak as me. No rules, no fixing, no judgment. Just me." I started writing sentences freely, then reading them aloud. I see the sun. I feel the wind. I hear birds. I am happy. I make mistakes. I speak. I listen. I am me. The words sounded awkward, simple, and honest. And that was exactly what made them beautiful. I realized then that my voice was not in perfection, it was in authenticity. Later, I decided to test my voice in the real world. I walked to a nearby cafe, notebook in hand, and approached the counter. The barista smiled. "Hello. How are you today?" My heart jumped. Normally, I would have rehearsed dozens of sentences, worried about pronunciation, feared mistakes. But today, I spoke simply, "I am happy. I want a small coffee, please." "Thank you." She smiled warmly and said, "Great. That will be $2.50. I paid, thanked her, and walked to a table. I noticed something remarkable. The simple act of speaking with my real voice felt powerful. It felt alive. No rules. No judgments. Just connection. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Speaking with my voice is freedom. Listening with my heart is connection." The words felt heavy with truth. I realized that all my years of trying to fix myself, trying to perfect English, trying to avoid mistakes, had blocked my real voice. Now, my voice was emerging quietly, gently, beautifully. Later in the afternoon, I called my online conversation group. Today, I focused entirely on my voice. I spoke freely about my morning, the park, the cafe, the people I met. I stumbled, I paused, I laughed at mistakes, but I noticed something profound. The more I allowed my voice to be real, the more others listened, responded, and connected. My voice was not perfect, but it was enough. After the conversation, I sat quietly and reflected in my notebook. My voice is mine. It does not need perfection. It does not need approval. It only needs presence, courage, and truth. That evening, I practiced one more exercise. I closed my eyes, spoke freely, describing my feelings, surroundings, and thoughts. I feel calm. I feel alive. I make mistakes. I laugh. I speak. I listen. I am imperfect. I am me. I noticed a quiet shift inside. The old voice that whispered, "You are not enough," was almost silent now. In its place was curiosity, acceptance, and joy. I realized then that realizing my voice was not about English. It was about life. It was about noticing, speaking, listening, connecting, and allowing myself to be real. Before sleep, I reflected on all the lessons I had learned over the past days. Courage, listening deeply, embracing imperfection, finding flow, and now realizing my voice. Each step had been small, gentle, and human. Each step had brought me closer to freedom, not the freedom to be perfect, but the freedom to be alive, to speak, to listen, and to connect. I wrote one final sentence in my notebook that night. I am learning. I am speaking. I am listening. I am imperfect. I am flowing. I am me. I am enough. I whispered it aloud softly, slowly, feeling each word. I am learning. I am speaking. I am listening. I am imperfect. I am flowing. I am me. I am enough. And in that quiet moment, I felt a deep, profound peace. The journey of English, mistakes, courage, listening, imperfection, and flow had led me here, to my real voice, alive and free. I realized then that every learner, every person, every moment of hesitation, mistake, and doubt was part of this journey. The journey was not about fixing ourselves. It was about realizing our voice, noticing life, embracing mistakes, speaking with courage, listening deeply, finding flow, and allowing ourselves to be human. And as I drifted off to sleep, I smiled quietly, knowing the journey would continue. Every word, every sentence, every conversation, every moment of attention was part of the story. And the story, my story, was alive, imperfect, and beautiful. The next morning, the sunlight felt softer, gentler, like it was encouraging me to begin again. Over the past days, I had practiced courage, listening deeply, embracing imperfection, finding flow, and realizing my voice. Each day had been a small step, and each step had brought me closer to freedom and confidence. That morning, I realized something simple but powerful. Growth is made of small steps, not leaps. I made my tea, opened my notebook, and reflected. I wrote, "Small steps are enough. Small steps lead to big changes." I repeated it aloud, slowly. The words felt calm, steady, and reassuring. I realized that for so long, I had been chasing big results, perfect English, perfect sentences, perfect conversations. And in that chasing, I had lost the joy of each small, everyday step. I decided to test this idea in practice. I took a short walk in my neighborhood, notebook in hand. I looked around carefully and described everything in English, slowly, aloud. The tree is tall. The flowers are red and yellow. The birds are singing. I see a cat on the wall. I feel happy. I noticed something important. Each sentence was small, simple, and natural. I didn't need complex words. I didn't need long sentences. I only needed attention, observation, and presence. Each small sentence was a step. Each small sentence was a victory. Each small step brought joy. Later, I decided to speak to a neighbor. She was watering her plants. I took a deep breath and said softly, "Hello. Your flowers are beautiful." She smiled warmly and replied, "Thank you. You speak English very well." I smiled back, feeling a small thrill of joy. I realized that one small sentence, spoken with courage and presence, could create connection, warmth, and happiness. Back at home, I reflected on the morning's practice. I wrote in my notebook, "Small steps are powerful. One word, one sentence, one conversation at a time. That is enough." I repeated it aloud slowly, savoring each word. It felt like a quiet truth I had known all along but had forgotten. Later that afternoon, I joined my online conversation group. Today, I focused on small steps. I spoke about simple things, my breakfast, my walk, the flowers I saw. I made small mistakes. I hesitated. I laughed. And something magical happened. The conversation flowed naturally. The small steps added up. Each sentence built on the last. Each question and answer created connection. The small steps created a rhythm of learning, speaking, and listening. After the session, I reflected again in my notebook. Every small step matters. Each sentence, each word, each conversation builds confidence. Each small step is a victory. I smiled quietly, realizing how powerful small steps could be. I had spent so many years chasing perfection, chasing big results, that I had forgotten the beauty of small progress. That evening, I practiced another exercise. I described my day in English, aloud, slowly, paying attention to each detail. I drank tea. I walked outside. I saw flowers. I spoke to a neighbor. I listened to my friend. I made mistakes. I laughed. I feel happy. Each sentence was small. Each sentence was simple. And yet, together, they formed a story. A story that was mine, alive, imperfect, and beautiful. I realized then that the power of small steps applied to everything English, life, relationships, learning, growth. I didn't need to be perfect. I didn't need to rush. I only needed to take one step at a time, notice it, and celebrate it. Before sleep, I reflected once more. I whispered slowly to myself, I take small steps. I speak slowly. I listen carefully. I embrace mistakes. I flow with life. I am enough. And in that quiet, gentle moment, I felt a deep, calm confidence. The journey of English, mistakes, courage, listening, imperfection, flow, and realizing my voice had led me here to a place of steady growth, presence, and joy. Small steps were enough. Small steps created freedom. Small steps created life. The morning air was calm, soft, and cool. I woke slowly, stretching, feeling a quiet sense of anticipation. Over the past days, I had discovered courage, deep listening, imperfection, flow, my voice, and the power of small steps. Each day had brought something new, and now I realized there was one more thing to explore, embracing my story. Not just the words I spoke in English, but the life I lived, the experiences I had, the mistakes I made, and the person I was becoming. I made my tea and sat by the window. I looked out at the street, noticing people walking, cars passing, birds flying. I whispered softly, every person has a story. And so do I. My English is part of my story. My life is part of my story. My mistakes are part of my story. I opened my notebook and began to write freely, describing my day, my feelings, and my thoughts. I woke up. I drank tea. I felt calm. I listened to the birds. I smiled. I spoke in English. I made mistakes. I learned. I am me. I read it aloud slowly. The words felt simple, honest, and warm. I noticed that when I spoke my own story, English became natural. I didn't need complex grammar or big words. I didn't need to hide my mistakes. My story itself carried meaning. Later that morning, I decided to share my story with a friend. I called her on the phone. I started slowly, hesitating at first. I want to tell you about my day and my learning in English. She smiled warmly on the other side. I continued, describing my morning, the tea, the birds, my small steps, the mistakes I had made, and the joy I felt. She listened patiently. She laughed with me. She encouraged me. And I realized something beautiful. Sharing my story, speaking in my real voice, and allowing imperfections made connection easier, deeper, and more joyful. English was no longer just a language. It was a bridge. A bridge between my story and another person's understanding. Later in the afternoon, I practiced speaking alone, narrating my experiences in English. I described small moments, little observations, and reflections. I saw a man walking his dog. The dog barked happily. I smiled. I felt joy. I spoke in English. I listened to myself. I made mistakes. I laughed. I am learning. I noticed that storytelling in English helped me connect all the skills I had been practicing: courage, listening, imperfection, flow, voice, and small steps. Storytelling became a full practice of English, not just speaking, but thinking, noticing, connecting, and reflecting. That evening, I joined my online conversation group. Today, I wanted to share a small story about my day. I started slowly. Today, I woke up and drank tea. I listened to birds. I walked in the park. I spoke with people. I made mistakes. I felt happy. As I spoke, I stumbled a few times. I forgot words. I laughed. But something magical happened. The group listened, responded, and connected with my story. Some shared similar experiences. Some asked questions. Some laughed with me. I realized then that stories, even simple ones, create understanding and connection. After the session, I reflected in my notebook. My story is enough. My English is enough. My mistakes are enough. Sharing my story brings connection, learning, and joy. Later that night, I practiced one final exercise. I closed my eyes and narrated my life in English for 5 minutes. I spoke freely, without judgment. I am learning English. I make mistakes. I speak. I listen. I notice life. I walk. I see people. I smile. I am me. I am enough. I notice the rhythm of my words. I notice the flow of my sentences. I notice the joy of telling my own story, speaking my own voice, embracing my imperfections. And I realized that embracing my story was the key to freedom. It was the key to connection. It was the key to learning English naturally, joyfully, and deeply. Before sleep, I reflected once more, whispering softly, I embrace my story. I speak my story. I listen to my story. I share my story. I am enough. I am learning. I am alive. And in that quiet, gentle moment, I felt a profound sense of completeness. The journey of English, courage, listening, imperfection, flow, realizing my voice, small steps, and embracing my story had led me to a place of confidence, presence, and joy. My story and my English were alive, imperfect, and beautiful. The morning light was bright, warm, and inviting. I woke up with a quiet sense of determination. Over the past days, I had practiced courage, listening deeply, embracing imperfection, finding flow, realizing my voice, taking small steps, and embracing my story. Each day had built a layer of confidence, and now I felt ready to take the next step, speaking with confidence. Not loud, not perfect, but steady, calm, and real. I made my tea, opened my notebook, and whispered softly, confidence is speaking. Confidence is presence. Confidence is trusting myself. I wrote a few sentences freely. I speak English. I listen. I make mistakes. I learn. I feel joy. I am enough. I read them aloud slowly. The words felt warm, steady, and alive. I noticed that confidence didn't come from perfection. It came from presence and practice. Later that morning, I decided to test my confidence in real life. I walked to a small cafe nearby. I noticed the barista smiling as I entered. I took a deep breath and approached the counter. Hello. Can I have a small coffee, please? I said slowly, clearly. The barista smiled warmly. Sure. That will be $2.50. I paid and thanked her. Then I walked to a table and noticed something remarkable. Speaking with confidence made everything feel lighter. My words felt steady. My thoughts felt calm. I wasn't afraid of mistakes anymore. I was simply present. I took out my notebook and practiced describing my surroundings in English. The sun is bright. The cafe smells like coffee. People are talking quietly. I feel calm. I speak English. I make mistakes. I am learning. Each sentence was simple, small, and confident. And each sentence built on the last, creating a rhythm of speech that felt natural and strong. Later, I called my online conversation group. Today, I focused on confidence. I spoke about my morning, the cafe, the people, and my feelings. I stumbled a little, forgot words, and laughed at myself. But I noticed something important. My confidence didn't depend on being perfect. My confidence came from speaking, trying, and being present. As the conversation flowed, I noticed my sentences became smoother. I listened carefully, responded naturally, and shared small stories. Confidence was not about dominating the conversation. It was about being fully present, speaking clearly, and trusting my voice. The more I spoke, the more natural English felt. The more I listened, the more alive the conversation became. After the session, I reflected in my notebook, confidence is not perfection. Confidence is speaking. Confidence is listening. Confidence is trusting myself and my voice. The words felt simple, but they carried a quiet power. I realized that confidence was not something I needed to chase. It was something I built moment by moment, step by step. Later that evening, I practiced another exercise. I recorded myself speaking freely about my day. I woke up. I drank tea. I walked to the cafe. I spoke English. I listened to people. I made mistakes. I laughed. I felt confident. I am learning. I am enough. Listening to the recording, I noticed my voice sounded calm, steady, and alive. I stumbled sometimes, laughed at mistakes, and paused, but the overall feeling was one of confidence. My words carried presence, my voice carried rhythm, and my sentences carried life. That night, before sleep, I reflected quietly. I whispered slowly, feeling each word. I speak English. I listen. I embrace mistakes. I share my story. I take small steps. I flow with life. I am confident. I am enough. I smiled softly. I realized that confidence was not a destination. It was a practice. It was built through courage, listening, imperfection, flow, realizing my voice, small steps, and embracing my story. And as I lay in bed, I felt a deep, calm certainty. I was ready to continue speaking, learning, and living fully in English. I noticed one final thought. Confidence grows when we allow ourselves to be human, when we embrace mistakes, when we listen, when we speak freely, when we share our story. Confidence is the natural result of presence, courage, and practice. And it feels quietly beautiful. As I closed my eyes that night, I whispered softly once more. I speak confidently. I listen deeply. I embrace mistakes. I share my story. I flow with life. I am learning. I am enough. And in that peaceful moment, I felt the quiet joy of growth, the power of presence, and the freedom of speaking confidently. The morning was calm, the light gentle and golden. I woke slowly, taking a deep breath and feeling the quiet weight of the journey I had traveled. Over the past days, I had discovered courage, deep listening, imperfection, flow, my voice, small steps, storytelling, and confidence. Each day had been a lesson, each step a practice. And now, as I sat with my tea and notebook, I realized it was time to reflect, to tie everything together and notice how far I had come. I began writing slowly. I am learning. I am speaking. I am listening. I am imperfect. I am flowing. I am me. I am enough. I read it aloud, savoring each word. I noticed how my voice sounded calm, steady, and alive. Each sentence carried the echoes of courage, the warmth of listening, and the joy of mistakes. Each word felt connected to the life I lived, the steps I took, and the story I was embracing. I thought about courage first. I remembered walking to the cafe, speaking English to a stranger for the first time, and feeling a small thrill of bravery. Courage was not about being fearless. Courage was about stepping forward, speaking, listening, and connecting, even when fear was present. That small act of courage had opened the door to everything that followed. Then I reflected on listening deeply. I remembered the park, the birds, the children playing, the conversations with friends. I realized that listening was not just hearing words, it was noticing life, feeling emotion, and connecting to people and moments. Listening gave my words meaning. Listening created presence. Listening brought English alive. I smiled as I thought about imperfection. I remembered laughing at mistakes, letting sentences tumble out, stumbling over words, and feeling joy instead of fear. Mistakes were no longer enemies. They were teachers, mirrors, and companions. I had discovered the joy of imperfection, and in that joy, I found freedom. Next, I reflected on flow. Speaking freely, describing my surroundings, narrating my experiences, it all had a rhythm, a gentle movement. Flow was not about perfection. Flow was about presence, attention, and letting words move naturally. When I allowed flow, English became alive, musical, and effortless. I thought about my voice. The quiet voice I had hidden for so long, the one afraid of judgment and mistakes, was finally emerging. My voice was real, human, imperfect, and alive. Realizing my voice was one of the most powerful moments of this journey. It reminded me that language is not just about words, it is about expression, connection, and being present. Then I considered small steps. So often, I had chased perfection and results, forgetting that growth comes in small, careful, patient steps. Speaking one sentence, listening carefully, making one small observation, sharing one short story, each step mattered. Each step built confidence, connection, and joy. Small steps were enough. Small steps were powerful. Storytelling had become another key. I remembered sharing my story with friends, speaking aloud about simple moments, mistakes, joys, and reflections. Storytelling connected me to others. Storytelling helped me practice English naturally. Storytelling reminded me that language is alive, personal, and human. Finally, I reflected on confidence. Speaking calmly, clearly, and steadily, trusting my voice and embracing mistakes, it all had led to a quiet, deep confidence. Confidence was not loud or perfect. Confidence was being present, being real, and trusting the process. Confidence had been growing with every sentence I spoke, every word I listened to, and every mistake I embraced. I closed my notebook and whispered softly, I am learning. I am speaking. I am listening. I am imperfect. I am flowing. I am me. I am enough. I am confident. The words felt alive. I noticed the rhythm of English in my own voice. I noticed the connection between words, thoughts, and feelings. I noticed the joy of being present in the moment, fully engaged in language, fully engaged in life. I thought about all the learners listening to this story. I wanted to say to them, softly, slowly, you do not need to be perfect. You do not need to rush. You do not need to fix yourself. Speak. Listen. Make mistakes. Embrace imperfection. Take small steps. Find flow. Realize your voice. Share your story. Build confidence. And above all, remember, you're enough. Then I reflected on my own journey. The days of fear, hesitation, and judgment were not gone. They were part of the story. But now I had tools, awareness, and joy. I had discovered a way to speak, listen, and learn English naturally, fully, and beautifully. And that, I realized, was the most important lesson of all. Before sleep, I practiced one final exercise. I closed my eyes and spoke aloud in English, describing life, experiences, feelings, and reflections. I wake up. I drink tea. I notice the sun. I see people. I speak English. I listen. I make mistakes. I laugh. I share my story. I take small steps. I am learning. I am alive. I am enough. And as I whispered these words, slowly, softly, with presence and attention, I felt something profound, a quiet joy, a deep confidence, and a calm freedom. English was no longer just a language to learn. English was a path to life, connection, self-expression, and presence. I smiled, closed my eyes, and whispered one last time, I am learning. I am speaking. I am listening. I am imperfect. I am flowing. I am me. I am enough. I am confident. I am alive. And in that quiet, peaceful moment, I felt the gentle power of this journey, the power of courage, listening, imperfection, flow, voice, small steps, storytelling, and confidence. The journey was alive. My English was alive. And I was alive.